Is it mercy or madness to bleed for a stranger who is secretly the devil himself? When Jessica shields a helpless man from an attack, she unknowingly saves the ruthless dragon of the East, and he intends to repay the debt.
Rain hammers against the asphalt of a dark alley. A switchblade arcs through the downpour, aiming for a cowering homeless man in a torn military jacket. But the blade never reaches him. Instead, it sinks into a bright, reflective orange safety vest. Jessica Reed gasps, her body collapsing onto the stranger she just tried to save. But as she falls, the man beneath her doesn't tremble. He stops acting. Kang Jae-Hyun looks up, his eyes shifting instantly from fear to a cold, predatory rage. The delivery girl didn't just save a beggar. She woke up a monster.
Pain was the first thing to return, a sharp, rhythmic throb in her chest that synced with the steady beep of a monitor. Jessica forced her eyes open, expecting the harsh fluorescent hum of a county ER, the smell of bleach and desperate overcrowding. Instead, she smelled orchids and ozone. She wasn't in a hospital. She was lying in a bed with sheets that felt like spun silk, in a room walled entirely by glass. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling panes, the city sprawled below, a grid of rain-blurred neon shivering in the dark. It was a view that cost millions, a view belonging to gods and monsters, not delivery girls who lived on ramen and debt. The silence was absolute, heavy, and expensive. She tried to sit up, but a sharp flare of agony pinned her back to the pillows. "Careful," a deep voice rumbled from the shadows. "The stitches are fresh." Jessica turned her head. Sitting in a leather armchair in the corner was a man. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like armor, crisp and tailored. His hair was styled back, revealing a sharp, aristocratic jawline and eyes that held the cold stillness of a frozen lake. There was no grime on his face, no desperation in his posture, but she knew those eyes. "You," she rasped, her throat dry as sandpaper. Memories of the alley flashed, the rain, the switchblade, the homeless man huddled in the mud. The man in the alley, the homeless man. "I have been called many things," he said, standing and walking toward the bed with the silent grace of a jungle cat. "Homeless is a new one." He stopped at her bedside, pouring a glass of water from a crystal pitcher. The expensive watch on his wrist caught the low light, platinum, worth more than her father's entire life. This wasn't the trembling victim she had thrown her body over. This was a king looking down at a pawn. "You were being beaten," she whispered, confusion warring with a rising cold dread. "I saved you." "You intervened," he corrected softly, handing her the glass. His fingers brushed hers, warm and calloused, a fighter's hands wrapped in a gentleman's skin. "An unnecessary sacrifice, though I suppose I should thank you. It has been a long time since anyone was foolish enough to bleed for me without asking for a price." Jessica stared at him, the water trembling in her grip. The torn military jacket was gone, replaced by Italian wool. The fear she thought she'd seen in the alley had been a performance, a mask worn by a predator to lull its prey. She looked around the glass walls, realizing with sinking horror that there were no doors she could see, only the infinite drop of the skyline. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the drumming of the rain against the glass. He leaned in, the scent of expensive sandalwood and metallic danger filling her senses. "My name is Kang Jae-Hyun, and I'm afraid, Jessica Reed, that you are no longer just a delivery girl."
The water glass trembled in Jessica's hand as she set it down on the bedside table, the crystal clinking sharply in the quiet room. Kang Jae-Hyun didn't move away. He stood watching her with that unnerving, predatory stillness, as if calculating the exact weight of her soul. "You mentioned debt," he said, the subject shift jarringly abrupt. He walked to a sleek obsidian desk on the far side of the suite and returned with a tablet. He held it out, the screen glowing with a list of numbers that made Jessica's stomach turn colder than the rain in the alley. It was her life, every unpaid bill, the second mortgage on her father's shop, the crushing interest rates from the loan sharks who had circled her family like vultures since the funeral. "How did you get this?" she demanded, shame flushing her pale cheeks. "This is private." "Privacy is a luxury for those who don't bleed on my pavement," Jae-Hyun replied smoothly. He tapped the screen. "I believe in balance, Jessica. You saved my life, an act I did not ask for, but one that requires payment. I have liquidated your debts. The shop is yours, free and clear. The loans are zeroed out." He said it casually, as if he were discussing the weather, offering her the one thing she had prayed for every night for 3 years: freedom. A life where she didn't have to pedal a bike through monsoons just to keep the lights on. Jessica looked at the numbers, then up at his face. It was a face of stone, unblemished and expectant. He thought this was a transaction. He thought he could buy the hole in her chest with a bank transfer. "No," she whispered. Jae-Hyun blinked, a microscopic crack in his composure. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Jessica pushed the tablet away, wincing as the movement pulled at her stitches. "I didn't help you for money, and I won't take a payoff from whatever this is." She gestured vaguely at the luxury surrounding them, the sterile wealth that felt suffocating. "I don't want your blood money." Jae-Hyun withdrew the hand holding the tablet, his expression shifting from indifference to genuine confusion. He tilted his head, studying her like a rare, baffling specimen. In his world, everyone had a price. Mercy was a commodity, and silence was the most expensive item on the menu. "It is not blood money," he said, his voice dropping an octave, darker now. "It is survival. You are drowning, Miss Reed. I am offering you a boat." "I'd rather swim," she shot back, her voice shaking but defiant. "I don't know what kind of business you're in that requires acting like a homeless man to slit throats in an alley, but I know I don't want any part of it." A strange shadow passed over Jae-Hyun's face, not anger, but a dawning realization. He set the tablet down on the nightstand with a definitive click. "You think I am merely a criminal," he murmured, almost to himself. "You think this is about hush money for a petty gangster." He stepped closer, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. The air between them crackled with a dangerous electricity. "Keep your pride, then, Jessica, but do not mistake my generosity for negotiation. You refused the money. Now you are left with the truth, and that comes with a much higher interest rate."
Days bled into nights in the glass fortress, marked only by the shifting hues of the skyline and the rhythmic changing of the guard. Jessica's strength was returning, the fire in her chest dulling to a persistent ache, but with clarity came a creeping, cold paranoia. The penthouse was designed to look like a paradise, filled with light and rare art, but Jessica began to see the cracks in the facade. It wasn't just a home, it was a bunker. She noticed it in the way the staff moved. The man who brought her meals didn't walk like a waiter. He moved with the silent, heavy-footed grace of a bouncer. When he poured tea, his eyes didn't watch the cup. They scanned the perimeter of the room, checking the exits. She noticed it in the windows, glass that was too thick, warping the view slightly at the edges. Bulletproof. Restless and stifled by the silence, Jessica pushed herself out of bed. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to walk to the ensuite bathroom, desperate for a moment of privacy away from the unseen eyes she felt burning into her back. The bathroom was a cathedral of black marble and gold fixtures, smelling of eucalyptus. She gripped the edge of the vanity, staring at her reflection. She looked ghostly, the orange vest replaced by silk pajamas that cost more than her rent, but her eyes were haunted. She opened the cabinet beneath the sink, looking for fresh gauze or aspirin, anything normal in this alien landscape. She pushed past plush white towels and expensive grooming kits. Her hand brushed against something cold and hard, taped to the underside of the marble lip. Jessica froze. Slowly, she crouched lower, peering up into the shadows of the cabinetry. There, secured with industrial tape, was a matte black handgun. It wasn't dusty. It was clean, oiled, and positioned for an immediate, desperate draw. Her breath hitched. A rich man might have a safe. A paranoid man might keep a bat by the door. But a gun caped under a bathroom sink wasn't for home defense. It was a failsafe for an assassination attempt. It was the weapon of a man who expected violence to find him while he brushed his teeth. She pulled her hand back as if burned, the cold steel lingering on her fingertips. The illusion of the safe recovery room shattered. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the held breath before a scream. Jae-Hyun hadn't brought her here just to heal. He had brought her into a war zone, and she was standing at ground zero without a weapon of her own.
The discovery of the gun had turned fear into a cold, hard knot of suspicion that propelled Jessica out of the suite. She moved through the darkened penthouse like a thief, the silence pressing against her eardrums. She needed answers, and she knew the locked double doors at the end of the hall held them. To her surprise, the heavy oak door was unlatched. She pushed it open, slipping into a room that smelled of stale tobacco and old paper. It was a war room disguised as a study. Monitors covered one wall, displaying live feeds of the city streets, but Jessica's eyes were drawn to the massive desk in the center. It was covered in maps, but not of enemy territories or smuggling routes. They were maps of her delivery zones. Her breath hitched. She walked closer, her fingers hovering over glossy photographs scattered across the wood. There she was, blurry and unaware, locking her bike outside a noodle shop at 2 a.m. There she was again, handing a bag to a customer at 3:15 a.m. A thick red line was drawn over a street map, marking her nightly path with terrifying precision. Stop 1. Stop 2. The alley. "You're very punctual," a voice said from the darkness. Jessica spun around. Jae-Hyun stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the hall light. He stepped inside, closing the door with a soft click. He didn't look angry that she had broken in. He looked resigned. "Why?" Jessica whispered, holding up a photo of herself. "Why are you tracking me? Was I a target?" "No," Jae-Hyun said, walking past her to trace the red line on the map with a finger. "You were camouflage." He looked up, his face devoid of the warmth he had feigned in the alley. "My enemies were hunting me. I needed to move through the city unseen, but a man like me draws attention. I needed a blind spot, a pattern so mundane, so invisible that no one would look twice at it." Jessica felt the blood drain from her face. "Me?" "You," he confirmed, "the graveyard shift delivery girl. Always on time, always on the same route. I learned your schedule, Jessica. I learned that at 3:42 a.m. you cut through the alley behind the market. I knew that if I was there, looking like garbage, crouched in your shadow, the assassins tracking me would hesitate. They wouldn't see a warlord. They would see urban decay." The cruelty of it stole her breath. He hadn't just been hiding. He had been hiding behind her. "You weren't a person to me," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and horror. "You were a shield. You waited in that alley knowing I would come. You knew if they started shooting, I'd be the one in the crossfire." "I calculated the risks," he said coldly. "I did not expect you to jump from front of the knife. That was a variable I failed to predict." "I took a knife for a lie," Jessica spat, backing away from him as if he was the one holding the blade. "You let me bleed so you could catch a traitor." "And it worked," Jae-Hyun said, his eyes hard and unyielding. "But you are right. You were a shield. And now that the shield is broken, you are of no use to me." He paused, the air growing heavy. "Which is why you should have taken the money." The truth hung in the air like smoke, choking the breath from Jessica's lungs. She looked at the map, then at the man who had turned her life into a tactical advantage. The gratitude she had felt for his hospitality, the confusion she had felt about his identity, it all curdled into a sharp, acidic loathing. "You calculated the risk," she repeated, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a cold, hard fury.
You calculated my risk. She didn't wait for an answer. She turned and marched out of the study, the adrenaline surging through her veins, masking the searing pain in her chest. She went straight to the foyer, her bare feet slapping against the cold marble. She didn't bother changing out of the silk pajamas. She just wanted out. She wanted the rain, the grime, the debt, anything that was real, anything that wasn't this gilded cage built on lies. Miss Reed, the massive guard at the elevator, stepped in front of her, his chest a wall of black wool. Please return to your room. Get out of my way, Jessica snarled, shoving at him. It was like shoving a statue. Let her go. Jae-Hyun stood at the end of the hallway. He hadn't chased her. He stood with his hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression that was terrifyingly empty. He looked like a man watching a building burn down, knowing he had dropped the match. The guard hesitated. Sir, the threat level is still... I said, let her go. Jae-Hyun's voice was quiet, but it cracked like a whip. He looked at Jessica, his dark eyes locking onto her as across the expanse of the luxury penthouse. He could force her to stay. He could lock the doors, sedate her, and keep her safe in this glass tower until the war was over. It was the logical move. It was the safe move. But he saw the way she looked at him now, not with the pity of the alley or the confusion of the hospital bed. She looked at him with pure, unadulterated revulsion. To keep her now would be to confirm everything she believed, that she was just a pawn, a possession, a shield to be used and discarded. He had lost the right to protect her the moment he decided to use her. You are walking into the dark, Jessica, he said, a final grim warning. They are still out there. I'd rather take my chances with the wolves, she spat, jamming her thumb against the elevator call button, than stay with the shepherd who feeds them. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Jessica stepped inside, her eyes never leaving his. As the steel doors began to close, slicing his silhouette from view, Jae-Hyun didn't move. He just watched her disappear, the silence of the penthouse rushing back in to fill the space where her conscience used to be. He had saved his life, but he knew with a heavy, sinking certainty that he had just damned hers.
The freedom Jessica craved tasted like ash and exhaust fumes. She stumbled out of the high-rise lobby into the torrential downpour, the silk pajamas clinging instantly to her skin like a second freezing layer. Passers-by ignored her, just another tragedy in a city built on them. She hugged her arms to her chest, the stitches pulling tight with every shiver, and started walking toward the subway. She didn't know where she was going, home wasn't safe, and the hospital was too expensive, but she had to put distance between herself and the monster in the penthouse. She made it 2 blocks before a black sedan screeched onto the sidewalk, cutting off her path. Before Jessica could turn, the rear door flew open. Strong hands grabbed her, not the desperate, flailing grip of a street thug, but the precise iron hold of professionals. She didn't even have the breath to scream before she was shoved into the back seat, the door slamming shut and sealing out the city noise. The interior smelled of expensive leather and stale mints. Sitting across from her was a man with a face like a shark, smooth, pale, and utterly devoid of empathy. He adjusted his glasses, looking her over with mild amusement. "Director Choi," he introduced himself, his voice smooth. "You are harder to acquire than I anticipated. Jae-Hyun usually guards his assets better." "I'm not his asset," Jessica spat, huddled in the corner. "I'm nothing to him. He let me go." "He let you go?" Choi laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Then he is weaker than I thought. He let you leave because he couldn't bear to look at his own sin. But make no mistake, Miss Reed, you are the only thing in this city he cares about right now, which makes you very valuable to me." "I don't know anything," she pleaded, the fight draining out of her. "I just delivered noodles, please." "Oh, I know who you are, Jessica. I know everything about you." Choi leaned forward, pulling a file from the seat pocket. "I know about your debts, I know about your double shifts, and I know about your father." Jessica froze. "Don't talk about him."
It was tragic, Choi continued, feigning sympathy. A small business owner, beaten to death behind his own shop because he couldn't make the payments. The police called it a robbery gone wrong. He paused, letting the silence stretch. But we both know it was an enforcement action. He tossed a photograph onto her lap. It wasn't a picture of her father. It was a surveillance photo from 3 years ago, grainy and dark. It showed a group of men standing over a broken body, and in the background, leaning against a car, smoking a cigarette while he watched the brutality unfold, was a younger, harder Kang Jae-Hyun. "The Dragon of the East collects his debts," Choi whispered, the words landing like physical blows. Jae-Hyun didn't just use you as a shield this week, Jessica. His organization is the reason you have nothing left to protect. He didn't save your life. He's the reason your father is dead. Jessica stared at the photo, the world tilting on its axis. The man she had saved, the man she had held his hand, wasn't just a criminal. He was the architect of her ruin.
The abandoned shipyard on the edge of the district was a graveyard of rusted metal and rotting wood, the air thick with the smell of brine and diesel. Jessica sat bound to a steel chair in the center of the cavernous warehouse, a single bulb swinging overhead, casting long, oscillating shadows that made the darkness seem alive. Director Choi stood behind her, the muzzle of his pistol pressed cold against the base of her skull. "He won't come alone," Choi murmured, his eyes fixed on the sliding bay doors. "He's a tactician. He'll bring a squad." But when the doors groaned open, screeching against their tracks, only one silhouette stepped out of the driving rain. Kang Jae-Hyun walked into the light. He wore no jacket, no armor, no hidden holsters. His white dress shirt was soaked, clinging to his skin, rendering him transparently vulnerable. He held his hands out to his sides, palms open, showing the world he had nothing left to fight with. "No backup," Jae-Hyun called out, his voice echoing off the corrugated iron walls. "No tricks, just me." "How noble," Choi sneered, tightening his grip on the gun. "The Dragon of the East, bowing his head for a delivery girl. You've gone soft, Jae-Hyun." Jae-Hyun didn't look at Choi. His eyes were locked on Jessica. His eyes were dark pools of regret, stripping away the stoic mask he had worn in the penthouse. In this light, he looked neither a kingpin nor a homeless man. He looked like a ghost. "Is it true?" Jessica's voice broke the silence, jagged and raw. The photo Choi had shown her was burned into her retina. "My father, did you kill him?" Jae-Hyun flinched, a small, imperceptible movement that hurt more to watch than his violence. He didn't look away. He didn't offer excuses about the hierarchy or the nature of the business. He simply nodded. "I was the enforcer. My father gave the order. I ensured it was carried out. I stood there and watched a good man die for a debt he could never pay." He took a slow step forward, ignoring the way Choi cocked the hammer of the gun. "You want the crown, Choi? It's yours. You want my life? Take it." Jae-Hyun bowed his head, exposing the back of his neck, an executioner's dream. "But the girl goes free. That is the trade. My blood for hers. A life for a life." "Don't!" Jessica gasped, the hatred in her chest warring with a sudden, terrifying panic. "It is the only way," Jae-Hyun whispered, closing his eyes. "I took a father from a daughter. Today, I give the daughter her life back."
Choi smiled, a thin, serrated expression that promised nothing but endings. "Accepted," he said softly, "but I prefer a clean slate." He shifted his aim. The barrel of the gun moved from the base of Jessica's skull to the center of Jae-Hyun's forehead. Jae-Hyun didn't flinch. He didn't brace himself or look for an exit. He simply exhaled, his shoulders slumping in relief. He wasn't trading his life. He was disposing of it. He wanted the bullet. He wanted the darkness to finally swallow the guilt that had been eating him alive for 3 years.
It was a suicide note written in his enemy's handwriting. Jessica saw it, the surrender in his eyes, the absolute absence of the will to survive, and something inside her snapped. It was the same stubborn, inconvenient spark that had made her jump in front of a knife in a rainy alley, the same force that had kept her pedaling through exhaustion. She hated him. She hated what he represented, but she refused to be the reason another body hit the floor. She refused to let the silence win. As Choi's finger tightened on the trigger, Jessica threw her entire body weight to the right. The steel chair screeched against the concrete, tipping over and slamming violently into Choi's shins. The sudden impact threw his aim off by inches. The gun roared, a deafening crack in the enclosed space, but the bullet sparked harmlessly off the concrete beside Jae-Hyun's knee. "Move!" Jessica screamed, hitting the ground hard, her shoulder taking the brunt of the fall. The spell of resignation broke. The ghost vanished, and the dragon returned. Jae-Hyun didn't run. He lunged. He exploded upward from his knees with terrifying speed, tackling Choi before the director could recover. The two men hit the wet floor in a tangle of limbs and fury. The gun skittered away into the shadows. Chaos erupted. From the catwalks above, muzzle flashes lit up the warehouse like a strobe light. Choi's backup had arrived. Bullets chewed up the concrete, sending shards of stone flying. Jae-Hyun ignored the gunfire. He was pounding his fists into Choi's face, a brutal, rhythmic release of years of rage. He didn't care about cover. He was fighting like a man who still intended to die, just wanting to take the devil with him. "Jae-Hyun!" Jessica yelled. She had managed to scrape her bound wrists against a jagged edge of the rusted chair leg, tearing the skin but snapping the zip tie. She scrambled free, staying low. He didn't hear her. He was lost in the red haze. A bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him around. He staggered, blood blooming on his white shirt, and turned back to the fight, leaving himself wide open to the shooters above. He was going to let them finish him. Jessica didn't think. She grabbed the fallen gun from the shadows, gripped it with both hands, and fired blindly at the catwalks to suppress the shooters. Then she grabbed Jae-Hyun's collar, yanking him down behind a stack of shipping crates. He looked at her, dazed, blood dripping from his nose. "Why? You should have let them." "Shut up," she hissed, pressing her hand over his bleeding shoulder. Her eyes were hard, blazing with a fierce, terrified light. "You don't get the easy way out. You don't get to die to make yourself feel better. You owe me a life, Kang Jae-Hyun, and you're going to live long enough to pay for it."
The autumn sun hit the window of petals and thorns differently than the neon glare of the night shift. It was warm, golden, and steady. Jessica Reed stood behind the counter, her hands busy stripping thorns from a bundle of white roses. There was no orange safety vest, no radio crackling with delivery orders, just the smell of damp earth and cut stems. She still had the scar on her chest, a jagged line of raised pink tissue that ached when it rained, but the crushing weight of her father's debt was gone. The syndicate had dissolved into the shadows, eaten alive by its own internal wars after the night at the docks, leaving the city to breathe again. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful sound that no longer made Jessica flinch. She kept her eyes on the roses. "Be right with you." "Take your time," a voice replied. "I am in no rush." Jessica froze. The shears slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the wooden workbench. She looked up slowly, her heart hammering a rhythm she hadn't felt in months. Kang Jae-Hyun stood in the center of the shop, framed by buckets of sunflowers and lilies. He wasn't the trembling homeless man in the olive jacket. He wasn't the terrifying dragon in the charcoal suit. He was wearing a simple navy sweater and dark jeans. His hair was soft, falling over his forehead, no longer slicked back like armor. The bruises had faded, leaving only faint silver lines on his jaw, matching the ones she carried. He looked remarkably, terrifyingly human. He didn't approach the counter. He stood near the entrance, respecting the invisible line drawn by their history.
You're alive, Jessica said, the words feeling inadequate for the magnitude of the moment.
I am, Jae-Hyun said. He looked at his hands for a moment, hands that had destroyed her life and then saved it before meeting her gaze. I dismantled the board, Jessica. Choi is gone. The organization is fractured, stripped of its teeth. It took everything I had, but the ledger is finally balanced. And what do you have left? She asked quietly. Nothing, he admitted, his voice rough with honesty. No empire, no soldiers, no name that opens doors. He took a hesitant step forward, stopping by a display of hydrangeas. Just a debt I can never fully repay, and a question. Jessica wiped her hands on her apron, the silence stretching between them. It wasn't fearful anymore. It was heavy with grief, yes, but also with the strange, undeniable tether that bound two people who had seen each other's souls in the dark. What's the question? Jae-Hyun reached out, his fingers hovering over a single, unblemished white tulip. I would like to buy a flower, something for a new beginning, for a stranger who wants to introduce himself properly this time. He looked up, his dark eyes stripped of all their old defenses, offering her the only thing he had left to give, the truth. My name is Kang Jae-Hyun, and I was wondering if I could start over. Jessica looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man beneath the monster she had saved in the rain. She picked up the white tulip, walked around the counter, and held it to him. I'm Jessica. Hello, Jae-Hyun.